We are this evening going to continue to talk about the fundamentals of the faith. I'm going to do it a little bit differently this evening. It seemed like 2 weeks ago when I was doing the class, it seemed a little tedious. I was watching people's expressions like, huh? Okay, let's see if we can change this up a little bit. We're going to talk this evening about how Christians are known. What are the things that members of the body of Christ do it? How can you tell someone's a member of the church? Really talk about the fundamentals of Christian living. And we'll do that primarily from the book of Acts. So what's it look like? Somebody who's fundamentally living like a Christian. I'm going to start roughly in the middle of Acts chapter 9, and then we're going to backtrack to Acts chapter 2 and actually walk all the way through the book of Acts to see just what Christians do. I'll start in chapter 9 for this reason. Chapter 9, verse 26 and following. To make this point, that Christians associate themselves with a local congregation. They're wanting to be recognized as part of a body. Even the Apostle Paul did so in Acts chapter 9, verse 26. He came to Jerusalem. He attempted to join himself to the disciples. They were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles and declared to them how he had seen the Lord in the way, and that he had spoken to him, and how in Damascus he preached boldly in the name of Jesus. What's Barnabas doing? Well, first, what's Paul doing? He wants to be associated with the congregation, not just some loose cannon out there. There's credibility in being identified with the congregation. And what's Barnabas doing?
Validating his Christianity.
Yeah, he's validating the truth of Paul's conversion. Evidence of that is that Paul's teaching the exact same message those men in Jerusalem are. And so there's value in associating with that body. Some of them are questioning that in Acts chapter 9, verse 21. On one hand, people are amazed. All who heard him were amazed and said, "Is this not he who in Jerusalem made havoc of those who called on this name?" Well, that's his credibility problem. Is how could he go from that to what he's claiming to be now? Barnabas is helping to establish his credential. It's extremely important to be identified with a congregation. And in that, when we go back through the entire book of Acts, we're going to see the benefits of that. It does seem that so many people don't want to be identified with the church. Some people think, well, I just can't find one that suits me. Well, look harder then. But let's play this out. He's trying to be recognized as part of an established congregation. And for that reason, there's credibility. He's, as I mentioned, out there like some loose, wild cannon. And we see the benefit of it over in Acts chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. There is a great deal of validity or credibility there when a congregation would collectively recommend and send forth a preacher, and one who they're certain of what he's teaching. We know there they would send letters with the man. That's not so much practice today as it used to be, that you would send letters with the man. And so these letters of recommendation were sent with the person. Well, let's back up then in Acts chapter 2. with that foundation that a Christian is not only added by the Lord to the church, but they're going to identify with a congregation. Acts chapter 2, beginning there in verse 14. This, of course, is just before the church is established. And what's Peter doing in this section? These men have all come together. They're waiting for what has been foretold, the power of the Spirit coming upon them. But, verse 14, Peter, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice and spoke forth to them, saying, Men of Judea and all who dwell in Jerusalem, be this known to you, and give ear to my words. Why is he saying this? What do the people in Jerusalem say? These guys are drunk. No. They are not drunk. These are men who are speaking according to what has been foretold. They are indeed going to be speaking the word given to them by the Holy Spirit. And again, these aren't just a dozen men out there going off on their own tangents, are they? They are given to speak and are speaking a word that is going to be effective and powerful. And Peter's a witness to the credibility of those other men. Well, then, Peter, a little later in chapter 2, he's also given a witness about Jesus Christ, or what we'd call today an apology. He's declaring Jesus Christ, even before the Spirit falls upon them. And so, others then, like Peter and those like him, look in Acts 2 and verse 36. What are they going about to tell? Let all the house of Israel therefore know assuredly that God has made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. Now, if you got one loose guy out there saying it and somebody else, but all those believers then, they're going together be teaching the same truth about the one whom the Lord has made both Lord and Christ. It's validated by the evidence. I read that verse 36 and 37. Verse 36, in a sense, is the point of the sermon. Know assuredly that God has made him both Lord and Christ, this one whom you crucified. There's the guilty charge. And verse 37, there's the response. When they heard this, they were pricked in their heart, and they said to Peter and the rest of the apostles, Brethren, what shall we do? It's really the hinge, isn't it? Here's your guilt. You're going to do something about it. But again, it's this matter of all of them speaking in the same voice. What happens then? After that, all of them, in chapter 2, verse 38, and following that, yes, they obey Acts 2 in verse 38. This they did. When talking about fundamentals of Christian living, there's 6 things in the verses following that Christians are known to do by their association together. And so, why do they do that? I mean, they're recognized by doing these things, but why? In verse 41, those who had received this word were baptized, and there were added to them in that day about 3,000 souls. Why? I'm looking at the word received. Many of the versions will say they will receive it gladly. They had received both the bad news in verse 36 and the good news in verse 38 and 40. There's your guilt. Here's the remedy. Gladly receiving is what the original word means. Why gladly there? Because it's the only remedy for verse 37, a pierced heart. Yeah, they're glad to receive it. It's the only way to heal the heart. They're healed. They're at peace. And so, now as forgiven Christians, what are the other 5 things that are really fundamental to the Christian life? Verse 42. You know the passage well. They continued steadfastly in the apostles' teaching and fellowship and the breaking of bread and the prayers. That's talking about the first day of the week assembly. That's the worship together. That's what Christians do. It describes their devotion to the assembling for worship. Verse 44 then. What are they doing? Again, as I started out, they're identifying themselves. They're associating themselves in these house churches. They're having all things in common with others in that house. Oh, they can be from all kinds of different places and all kinds of different backgrounds. What they have in common is the faith. And so in verse 45 and 46, what are they doing? Not just the Lord's Day, but apparently every other day of the week, or on any day of the week, daily sharing, daily fellowship. And apparently it's spontaneous, isn't it? Unfortunately, now we have to plan it for 6 weeks ahead, but maybe we ought to go back to some of this spontaneity. Verse 47, what's the result of all this? What's being produced by this? They're praising God. They're praising God, and what are they finding? And they're having favor with all the people, not just those people within the house church. Everybody else sees what's going on. They're finding favor with all the people. It's just fundamental to that Christian way of living that people would see the difference in them. And the people outside the church would find that fellowship attractive, and by that then find the gospel valuable. And you'd see people that aren't part of the church yet, but they would start to anticipate being part of it. You know, you cannot take anything away from the gospel, but why is it being so effective there? Because the people are making it attractive. They're making it appealing. People want to be part of that. In verse 48, then, those who are being saved are being added to the church. But again, the members then are themselves the living proof that the gospel is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes. And the members' new way of living makes it all the more appealing. It's not just a matter of telling somebody, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do that. People are drawn to their lifestyle. Yes, Joe?
Well, in 2 Corinthians chapter 3,
Uh-huh.
kind of just goes on what you're saying.
Uh-huh.
And I know, are we beginning to commend ourselves again, or do we need, as some letters have come,
Right.
invitation to you or from you? You are our letter.
That's right.
Written in our hearts, known and read by all men. Being manifested that you are a letter of Christ, cared for by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts.
What's evident in their life? They're changed. If there needs to be any more validation of what Paul has preached and the power of it, just look at the people. Well, it's who's he writing to there? He's writing to people who are associated together in the church. You are the letter. And so this new way of living makes it all the more attractive. And then in chapter 4, verse 32, and following, much the same situation we saw in chapter 2, verse 41 and following, but at chapter 4, verse 32 and through 35. Again, what are they doing? Each one who has property, what are they gladly doing? Let me get to it. And the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and not one of them said that any of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. What are they doing? All things in common. Well, as in chapter 2, everything's shared, nothing's my own. If there's something you need, okay, I'll sell it and either give it to you or give you the funds to get what you need. It's not talking about socialism in any way at all, but it's about building Christian community, isn't it? You know, everyone, those who had much would make sure others have enough. Not that everybody has to have the same thing, but if you have much, then just make sure everybody has enough. I was looking into this the other day for a different matter, and I hadn't really stopped to think about it. Think about the culture at that time. It was largely an impoverished nation. Most all the people, I don't know, I could say they're a third world nation, but they're pretty close to it. Most everybody is poor, has been for generations. So you got this institutionalized kind of poverty throughout the nation. Then you got an upper class, the priestly class, they're well taken care of. And then you got the ones above that are living off Rome's money. But it's actually designed that way to keep these people impoverished and really as a peasant culture. Well, still in the church, everyone's going to make sure that you got enough. So as a result of that, in Acts chapter 5 and verse 20, they're brought together in this association, in this mutual caring for one another. And together then in Acts chapter 5 and verse 20, as a real fundamental to the Christian lifestyle, what are they doing? They'll go and stand and speak in the temple to all the people, all the words of this life. And when they heard this, they entered into the temple at about daybreak and taught. You see, all this association in the church, what's it facilitating? All these people coming to the temple, they want to hear more of this life. And even though, they're going to teach the word of this life, even though their own lives are being severely threatened. And you see then, as a fundamental of the church, it has always been about bringing others to Christ. And so, apparently, what you think about it?
Well, I'm just thinking that, yeah, their lives were in danger, and they still did it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still people in the world, really, but really not the United States. I mean, it's like people don't go and do like this.
Yep. And perhaps that's one advantage they had of being that kind of impoverished nation. And everybody, by and large, on that same low strata. I mean, they don't have all the distractions. They've got that very rudimentary kind of poor lifestyle, living basically, materially at least, living from day to day.
And their lives are being threatened constantly.
Yep.
My life isn't being threatened constantly.
No. It's amazing though, but there they are, threatened. What do they have apart from the church, in other words? Really, that is all their hope. That is their family. You think about the Jews who converted to Christianity. The church is the only family they got. They were dead. They were dead to the family. But there they go, and apostles certainly included, but others as well. In Acts chapter 5 and verse 28, what's happening? Believers are filling Jerusalem with the teaching of Jesus. Yes, the apostles. But if you tie it back to Acts 2 and verse 47, many Christians are out there, and they are finding favor with all the people. So yes, it's the apostles, but many Christians with them. They're filling Jerusalem with the teaching. Now, I guess it does help. There's not all the other distractions. But everybody, they're either talking about the gospel or speaking against it. Yes, Jeff?
Well, I know in Acts 2, that was during Pentecost, and there was people from all over. We're not just talking about locals.
Yeah.
There was people that, it would be like us going to New York City. I mean, it's a strange place. And then you are taught something that's stranger.
It'd be like being jobless and homeless in New York City.
Exactly. And then you're taught something that changes your life and turns it upside down. And you're doing everything here to help everybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, we would normally think, okay, take care of me. I've got to figure out how I'm going to be taken care of. And their concern is for their fellow brother and sister.
And at the same time, chapter 5, verse 29, they're known for their courage. This determination to obey God rather than men. I know it's talking about the apostles there, but this applied to everybody that was out there teaching. It wasn't only the apostles who were being jailed, but others. Whenever the two things conflict, it's not don't look at it like civil disobedience. It's obeying the higher power, the higher authority, and fulfilling their purpose. They're going to pay a price for that, aren't they? A severe one, a heavy one. But in this being tightly associated with the body of believers, being strengthened by that association and the fellowship, they're going to continue. They've determined they're going to fulfill that responsibility. And they, in the midst of all of that, in chapter 5, verse 41, they rejoiced that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for the name of Jesus. Again, how would you suffer that alone if you're out in the world and you're not part of a body? How long would you hold up to that alone? Or if you're out there alone and you are, I mean, how are people going to look at you? Like, crazy guy out there, But together they are rejoicing, counting worthy to suffer shame. And so we'll see then as this association continues and it builds, like in Acts 2 and Acts 4, again in Acts 6, we find that they take care of their own needy ones. This ties into what you mentioned, Jeff. Imagine you're in New York and you don't know anybody, you're jobless and homeless, and but somehow you're connected by faith to somebody there in New York. Again, most of first century Palestine was deeply impoverished, mostly lower class. And that was by design. Rome saw to it that way. They were going to keep it that way with the taxation and all that. Rome didn't care about the needy. Rome didn't care, so that left it to the head of each Jewish household to take care of his own and only their own, except when one of their own became a Christian. Then, you're out of here. Really, the Christian was dead to his family. So again, the church is all that he had. Oh, would the church be different today if we saw it as all that we truly have? That this really is our place of belonging. They take care of their own. Christian benevolence then is based solely on a shared faith. Didn't matter who they were or where they're from, who had more than somebody else. It's based on a shared faith. And this was an entirely new and unique practice. Christian benevolence based on a shared faith. That's something that world had never seen. We saw in chapter 2, 4, and here in chapter 6, benevolence is a pattern. And then in those same chapters, plus 6, 7, and 8, then boldly teaching others is also a pattern. But let's look here in chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. when the number of disciples was multiplying. Well, wherever there's growth, there's also problems, aren't there? There's going to be problems. You want a big church? Well, you're going to multiply your problems with it as well. But notice verse 4 through 7. This problem where some of them are feeling left out. What's the remedy? Start verse 3. Seek out therefore, brethren, from among you 7 men of good report, full of spirit and of wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But we will continue steadfastly in prayer and in the ministry of the word. And so that plan appealed to everyone. There's another benefit associating with the congregation. The credibility of establishing Stephen as a point man, a deacon for benevolence, so that all are served, so that any discontent that somebody feels that they're being left out, that's remedy, and the preaching continues. I really like the picture there as far as service in the church. Implied, the man or the person serving the needy is as important as the preacher, isn't he? Sometimes we kind of stratify it different than that, but really the person serving the needs of the body is as important as the preacher. Without the deacon's service, the preaching is limited and the kingdom's growth would be limited. And so implied there's equality among the membership, even the appearance of making distinctions between locals and people that were foreigners that came to town. That just can't be. And so in that the preaching continues. They select Stephen. He serves very well, of course. And at the same time in Acts 7, he's boldly speaking for Christ, even to the point of dying. I mean, there are plenty of people getting jailed and all the threats of death. But now to take it even to the point of dying, that other than the apostles, other believers are teaching Christ. And so, again, these things are really just fundamental, really, to the life of Christians. How would they be known? What things are associated with the Christian lifestyle in that day? In Acts chapter 8, verse 4 and following. The people, amid all that persecution and the threats, they went everywhere. They're going to the people everywhere. Not to the religious elite, but again, mostly to that impoverished, oppressed lower class. They went to them because they're the only ones who cares about souls. Rome doesn't care about really anything. They certainly don't care for people's souls. The Jewish priestly class is concerned about people's souls. But you've got these Christians, largely lower class themselves. What are they concerned about? Souls. You know, the Jewish presumption is that if you're needy, it's your fault. If you're sick, it's your fault. No, this is cultural, institutionalized poverty. But in the midst of all that, Christians aren't turning inward, are they? Most of them are trying to figure out how to make it from one meal to the next themselves. They're not turning inward because they value souls. It's interesting, though. You think about this impoverished culture. In Acts chapter 8 and verse 39. Well, first to those poor Christians. It didn't change their financial status, did it? Not at all. It doesn't change anybody's financial status. There in chapter 8 is that teaching of the eunuch. Now this guy's not worried about where his next meal's coming from. But what happens? Following the eunuch's baptism, he went away rejoicing. Whether it's for the poor or for the wealthy, it doesn't change their status, their financial condition in any way. But what really matters to them? Christ. Knowing that. It went away rejoicing. He had something he had no other way could have. No other cause for rejoicing. Fundamental to life, isn't it? If we go over to Acts chapter 11, here's more that we can learn about the power of good associations in the church. Of people in the church seeing the local need, but also seeing the much wider need. This is when there's teaching and growth of the church in Antioch, and Barnabas is sent from Jerusalem. And Barnabas is a good man doing a very good work of encouragement. And it says he's effective in bringing many to the Lord. But he can see the wider need, can't he? More could be brought to the Lord, possibly. Why would Barnabas, in chapter 11 and verse 25, why would he leave a good work in which he's being effective to go find the Apostle Paul? For the increase of the kingdom. You know, it's always about the increase of the kingdom. And in chapter 11, verse 26, for a year, both Paul and Barnabas are increasing and in strengthening the church in Antioch because a serious hardship and a test is coming. A famine is announced. It is coming. And it's a historical fact that it did come. Verse 28. What's happened so far? You have people whose credibility is established because of their association with the church. The benevolence is increasing, the teaching is increasing, the membership is increasing. Everything's increasing by fundamentally doing what Christians are to do. Well, here comes the test in chapter 11, verse 29. Testing this benevolence system. So a contribution is sent to Antioch, and it is to be sent by credible, trustworthy men. I found it interesting here that that word for sending is the word for apostello. It's the work, the action of an apostle. And so be it the gospel, or be it encouragement, or be it money, it's the sending, the action of sending that is fundamental among Christians. Sending according to their ability. Of course, those who had more gave more, and those who had less gave what they could, or sometimes more than they could. But again, what else is gained by this association with the church? Again, preaching increases, the benevolence, the fellowship increases, the number saved increases. Something else is increasing, something very important to the growth of the church. Acts chapter 12, verse 5 and 12. What else is happening as the church grows and as their bonds grow? Acts chapter 12 and verse 5. Peter, therefore, was kept in the prison, but prayer was made earnestly by the church to God for him. Prayer is increasing. Prayer is increasing. Verse 12. And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, surname was Mark, where many were gathered together and they were praying. They were already doing it when he was coming there. This is a matter of really fundamental to their life. They're praying to God. It's continuous. I'm going to take a little side note out of Acts here to go to 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 15. That's where we read that instruction about praying without ceasing. I'm not sure we've always been honest with that verse, because sometimes we can guilt somebody to think, well, you're not praying enough. It's not talking to one person. From that chapter 5 and verse 15 onward, every action it describes is plural. So it's not that one person is praying 24 hours a day. It's that by this group, this collective body, if I'm not praying right now because I'm working on something else, I know that you are. I mean, so effectively the prayers of the entire church are being raised to God 24 hours a day. It's all plural. Everything those people are doing is plural for the common good. So it pictures the entire church praying. The prayers of the collective body then never cease. I'm not going to make it through this before I have to pass this over to Glenn, but bear with me a couple of minutes, Glenn. But again, I keep stressing the value, the benefit of associating with the church. The credibility, the preaching, the benevolence, the fellowship, and the prayers are constantly increasing. And what's happening to the church? She's increasing too. All of it works together for the increase. I'll take time just to consider one more thing. Acts chapter 12, verse 24. All these positive things are increasing. What else is increasing? Chapter 12. 24. Even the increase of the opposition and the danger, even that works for the word of the Lord to grow and to multiply. You see, all things are working together for good. Be it for those who are suffering, or those who are benefiting from the church's benevolences, those who are giving themselves to prayer. Whatever they're doing by that association, as I mentioned earlier, the man who's serving the needy is every bit as important as the one that's doing the preaching, because it just facilitates more preaching. All of them in this together. That's how it's working together for good. I think these are just fundamentals to Christian living. It's a common devotion, common preaching of salvation. Well, I'm going to stop there, brother. I hope it's just good sometimes to do it in this format. Just walk straight through a book, and you can see not so much this story and that story and that story, but the whole thing together, how it's working and how it benefits the church and benefits the individual to be identified, to be working together. Then all good things increase. Even though the opposition increases, the gospel is proven to be powerful.